opportunity to share a little update here from Olmsted County. I've been asked to give remarks about where the county's at now with regard to COVID-19. But before we get too far into that, I want to talk about just a little bit about where we've been. In a moment, we're going to have Greg Briggs, our Olmsted County Director of Public Health, address more of the current efforts, specifically as it relates to local vaccine distribution. But let me go into a little bit of where we've been over the last year. So for the past 10 months, not surprisingly, the response to the pandemic has been and remains Olmsted County's top priority. While it's been a very difficult year, we all know that, one silver lining of COVID has been the strengthening of our partnerships and collaborations with all of you and other organizations. As a relative newcomer to Rochester, I still marvel at the fact that our community has access to the amazing medical resources of Mayo Clinic. I think sometimes you really have to be an outsider to really appreciate the difference between Mayo and other types of care available even in other parts of Minnesota. And the reason I say that, the reason it's important to recognize is because we have achieved one of the lowest COVID death rates in the country and probably in the world because of Mayo, and certainly because in part of the collaborative work between and among Mayo, Olmsted County, OMC, all the school districts, the city of Rochester and other cities in the county, and so many other partners. We've been through COVID together from the beginning, from the collaborative community testing site at Grand Park, to the contact tracing work we've done all year, the education efforts we've worked on together, and the current efforts on vaccine rollout, which really couldn't be done without that partnership. But it's not just been our employees in public health that have dedicated a significant amount of time this past 10 months to COVID. We also, families and individuals across the county have needed a lot of emergency help due to financial hardships, right, that have been caused by the pandemic. County employees have been there to respond to that call, along with city partners and others. So to help those who experienced food insecurity during the pandemic, the county partnered with Channel One, and we delivered 1,500 food boxes to people in need, partnered with RPS, that's the school district, to deliver food boxes from Grand Park. There's also been a lot of efforts through partnership with the city, and perhaps they'll speak about that a bit too. In 2020, the county distributed about $2.6 million in emergency aid, mostly for housing and utilities, to families and individuals. So that's just as a way of comparing, in a normal year, we would distribute about 300,000. So it was a huge amount, big lift, and a huge amount that we were able to get out to families and individuals. Our housing department partnered really closely with the city to provide additional support to homeless individuals during COVID. And we've also been working with landlords on thinking through what's going to happen at the end of the eviction moratorium, and to try to keep as many people housed in our county as possible. We've also been very involved with distributing emergency aid to small businesses and nonprofits in our area. The county, with our partners at Ready and which is Rochester Area Economic Development, Inc., and then also with Rochester Area Foundation, we're currently in the midst of our third round of grants, as most of you probably know, through a combination of the CARES funds and state aid and a little bit of levy. And so when that round is complete, we will have distributed $7 million to small businesses and about $1.4 million to nonprofits in the county. So all of that said, the heart of our response has really been the Olmsted County Public Health Services team and their work within the community over the last several decades, really, and their longstanding partnership with local hospitals and schools has really helped us set the stage for that collaborative community response. So now I'd like to turn to Greg Briggs to speak more about where we are currently in the county with our response to COVID. Greg.
All right, thanks Heidi, and hello to everyone. The first place I think I want to start out is Heidi mentioned briefly, this topic of collaboration, and I agree. I think she's right about this. As far as this community-wide COVID-19 response, that we've all been working on for the last year now. I think it's evident here that this is a medically focused community, and I think the partnerships that we've built over the years up to and including during the pandemic is really a driving piece in why we have seen lower numbers and less morbidity and mortality than a lot of other places around the state and the country. I think having said that, Heidi covered where we've been. I think where we're at right now in public health, as everyone knows, is vaccine is our highest priority right now. That's our path to get us out of this pandemic over the coming months here. So the biggest issue that we have right now is supply. We have a good problem in one sense here that while we think that there's hesitant population, the demand is so high right now that that's the biggest issue that we're dealing with, is how to communicate with the public about a very limited supply of vaccine doses that are going to priority groups, and how to coordinate all that information together has been the biggest challenge. So right now we're on the verge of wrapping up the last of the outside of inpatient setting healthcare workers, so dentists, chiropractors, group home staff and residents, and hope to wrap that up in the next week or so, and then start moving more officially into this, so what we call the 1B population. Our governor has prioritized 65 and older, along with a couple of other groups here with essential workers in schools and childcare as a priority for this state. So a little bit of that has already started, but we're working actively with Mayo and OMC and community health services, along with local pharmacies to work out details on how we can start getting into these larger community populations as we move into some of the other at-risk, or what we call essential workers, people that need to be at work to do their job in person. And the first in line there are the people that are working actively with the public, like in customer service, or at front desks of organizations and things like that need to be open. So in terms of vaccine distribution overall, Olmsted County is doing exceptionally well when we look at our overall vaccination rate. We're already up to about 18.8% of our population in Olmsted County has received at least one dose of COVID vaccine. That's compared to the statewide number of 8.3%, and nationally it's right around there as well. So we've got a good piece of the population already with some protection. Some of that is related to the proportion of healthcare staff that we have here and being allocated some vaccine for that, and another testament to the partnership that we've got, the coordination that's going on, and the ability with this community to vaccinate people quickly. There's a lot of talk right now about getting vaccine into arms quickly, and I know between the health department, OMC, and we're generally getting those doses into people's arms within about 48 hours after we receive them. So good news there. We still have a way to go, but it's pretty remarkable to think we've got 1 in 5 already with a dose of vaccine. We're working on our website. That's the second topic in addition to vaccine that I really wanted to bring up to this group. We've been trying to, with the health department, become a hub for information because it's changing so quickly. It's a very complicated message, and the biggest challenge here is trying to tell people who's next in line and where should they go. So that's constantly changing and being updated. Our PAC group under Deborah Miller has been crucial in getting that up and running and keeping that evolving, sometimes on day-to-day basis here. So the state has also got a dashboard through MDH up on vaccine information specific that's well put together and is up to date to the day on percentages of people vaccinated down to the county level, age breakdowns, and things like that too. So the third thing I wanted to talk about today is, Heidi mentioned this a little bit too, throughout the pandemic, we've really, it doesn't get as much attention as the contact tracing and all that sort of stuff that we do, but a really critical part of what we've been doing is doing education and outreach, so that we're getting to populations of color in the community, or those that might have more difficulty accessing testing, or don't speak English as a first language, really trying to work in those communities, first to educate on what COVID is, why mask wearing is important, and now we're really leveraging that too, along with our partners, to go back out into those communities and talk about vaccine and start trying to understand how we can get vaccine most easily available, address hesitancy issues now, so that when we've got vaccine, people are ready to take it. And working very hard right now, I think, on that education and outreach piece. Finally, I really just want to recognize it's about this community too. You know, we can work very hard now to contact trace and to manage cases and figure out who's at risk and do education and outreach. But the low rates of disease that we've had here, the community is a big part of it. People wearing masks and following recommendations and staying up to date on what's going on with this is a huge part of controlling transmission in the community. And while no place is perfect, we have had really amazing support, I think, overall in this community to follow recommendations and everybody do their part in trying to limit the strain on the system that we've seen across the nation with this. I think we still need to encourage people that while we're vaccinating this community up, we need to stay vigilant with the stuff that we're all really sick of, that we've been doing for the last year, social distancing and wearing masks, knowing the Super Bowl is this weekend. You know, all these sorts of things are still critical, particularly with some of these emerging variants that are starting to pop up, to make sure that we keep our transmission low in this community while we get ourselves vaccinated, and eventually over the next few months here, really walk our way out of this pandemic. And with that, I can turn it over to whoever's next.
Thank you for that. By the way, just to highlight that number, did I hear that right? That the state vaccination rate is 8% and Olmsted is at 18%?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great. Okay,
Mr. Chair, so yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, normally in a meeting, we would then open the floor and chaotically try to look around the table and see who raises their hand. What we're going to do now, if I understand it right, Patrick, is that on the screen will come something that will say 3 issues. We want you to pick one, and then the one that has the most, we'll ask them to drill down a little bit more on that. Am I doing that right?
That's right. That's
Okay.
right. Survey should come on the screen momentarily. Cue to Cody.
And thanks for the cue. I'm having some technical issues on my end.
Okay.
I'm reading a poll but can't share it.
Okay. Well, what we could do would be, if that's going to take a bit, why don't we move to the next one, and then we could poll both of those at the same time. How's that grab you?
Yep.
Okay, so let's move to the city people. We're now going to be able to turn over to Allison Zell right away in your first meetings of both of these groups. We're going to ask you to give an update on where the city's at. Ideally, keep it in the 5 to 7 minute range, and then our polling will definitely be ready by then, and we'll find out from that. Okay. So do I see you here on the screen?
Yep, I'm here. I'm hoping that we're going to share screen, but if not, I can get started.
Yep.
So I would want to start off by thanking the city team for their help putting this together. Obviously, it's day 10. However, as someone that's been working in local government in southern Minnesota, I've been experiencing this for almost a year now in different capacities. So I think it's really important to point out the efforts that the city has undertaken, and those really started in 2020 when the city council, prior and current, as well as the team came together to begin making cuts to the existing year budget for the city of Rochester in order to be able to weather some of the financial concerns we were coming and make space for our ability to address what the needs were of the community, both the business community and the residential community throughout the pandemic. That also led very quickly into a 2021 discussion of the budget that reflects no tax levy increase, which is rare across the state of Minnesota. I believe the average was about 4.5% increase, and the city of Rochester was actually able to keep a levy increase that was flat from the prior year. No parking rent or transit rate increases, and that was overall about over $100 million reduction to the 2021 current budget from 2020. That also helped to stabilize and make sure that we really focus on our credit rating. We are one of few cities in Minnesota and across the country that are able to maintain a AAA bond rating, which will help us weather the storm and come back in the future, making sure that we have the ability to continue our financial excellence and make sure that we can take advantage of the bond market in order to continue to build and continue to be committed to being strong fiscal stewards of the community. That also involved liquor license relief for 2021 in order to try to make some of those businesses whole, recognizing that the hospitality industry has seen some pretty significant impacts over this last year. So moving on, we also were able to focus on addressing the airports. Obviously, our partnership with the new airport company is very critical there in bringing tourism to Rochester and being able to treat people at the world-class hospital that we have here with Destination Medical. Our commercial passengers were down significantly, as well as our airport operations, although some general aviation really helped that, as well as some cargo transport. Obviously, the lodging tax was significantly impacted, although sales tax was able to weather the storm a little bit better. So our lodging occupancy has been hit hard, and that's something that we're going to need to be focusing on as we move through the rest of this year. Transit ridership, although down significantly, still was very important, keeping people moving through Rochester, and our partners in transit on the Rochester team really took seriously how they were going to be able to keep people moving in a safe way. And then obviously the parking ramps took a hit with all of the other impacts that came to us while we were mitigating the impacts of COVID-19 throughout the community, which obviously was important in order to be able to keep that the risk down for people medically. So CARES funding came to the city in 2020, and the focus there was also a balanced approach, similar to how the budget was addressed. And that was overall about $8.8 million coming to the city of Rochester, with that first round of just over $5 million in the coronavirus aid, relief, and economic security, focused on 3 balanced areas: support for people and programs, public service impact programs, and economic recovery programs. So really holding true to the council's foundational principles and vision and values to be able to spread some of this throughout the community, so no one area was left behind. So all of the things that the county shared, these were really important partnerships to be able to accomplish this. Through neighborhood arts and artists, the call center that the library has taken on, the repositioning of the Civic Center and Silver Lake Fire to be able to provide some of that warming and day center. We were ahead of the curve on remote work technology and some other things, and then really that security and stability for the community. And then the additional food access and assistance for individuals experiencing homelessness, and of course our small business community. With some of the Keep It Local and making sure the license grant program was working well as working closely to assist the hospitality community with outdoor dining and lifting some of our traditional processes for that. And I think it's really important to note all of the partnerships that came into play with that mitigation effort that kept the rates low for contraction and of COVID-19 in the area. The Rochester Ready program with all of the partners across the great city of Rochester and Olmsted County, with the city, DMC, Diversity Council, RDA, Olmsted County, Mayo Clinic, Ready, and the Rochester Area Chamber of Commerce, if you move forward, has been really important in order to be able to keep that message in front of the community to help them be key partners and players in keeping mitigation it at the forefront, and really keeping both the mitigation at the forefront of the disease, but also making sure that we were really focused on assuring that we were, as much as possible, strong and ready to keep moving outside of the pandemic as we start to see relief with the vaccines and start to see the ability for some of our economy to replenish and flourish and continue to build into the future. And I was really glad to see in the state of the city that Mayor Norton pulled together all of those partners. If you were able to watch that, I would really recommend that you take a look. As the city, is moving forward, I've seen a lot of this at play, and we were hearing it today already that there's a desire to continue those partnerships and collaboration that we, of necessity, we're building strongly in order to overcome something that most of us likely never expected to take place, a pandemic, really, reaching deep into our country, right down into every city, including Rochester. So that economic recovery, assisting the community, diversity, equity, and inclusion, increasing available resources, and creating and enhancing collaboration did come together for all of those groups in that state of the city, and that was really nice to see. And I think it's important also to touch on the city council. We have a wonderful new council coming together with Mayor Norton, Council President Carlson, now a new administrator, and the city team. And they've started some work to continue to build off of those foundational principles of compassion, environmental stewardship, fiscal responsibility and sustainability, public safety and social equity, and all of those things we've heard and have been elevated, but they've begun their work, if you move forward a few, on their council study session on January 25th to talk about how they intend to work together with relationships really being the center of that, understanding that
Allison, why don't we just let our slide advancer catch up, because I think you have some important graphics, and I want to keep pace with that. So I think one more slide.
Yep.
There you go.
I thought they'd catch up.
I know you were.
Keep me my 5 minutes.
Okay.
You're doing a great job. Thank you.
They really began working on their relationships and how they'll move forward. The importance of that understanding that change does have a ripple effect. That all of the things that we've been moving forward with, while they're very important, it's important to kind of take that step back and understand where are we now as a community. What does that mean with the new city council majority, with all of their voices being heard, the things that they bring, their values and what they bring to the representation, advocacy, stewardship, and consistency of their work, and what they need in order to do the hard work together to continue advancing on those important policy items for the city to incorporate compassion, social justice, public safety, and that fiscal responsibility, recognizing the unique time that we're in. And so if you'd advance again, the other thing that they really focused in on the second part of their discussion was the importance of the greater good for the team, how they're going to need to get community engagement and really understand what their priorities mean and how they can incorporate what the individuals, groups, businesses, partners need from them in order to be able to advance their work and have both healthy disagreements for these big items and big policy issues that they're trying to move forward, but have that grounded in respect and in always putting their relationships first, their relationships with each other, but also their relationships with partners that are represented here today on this collaborative meeting and individuals across the community. And through all of this, I think it's really important to point out that on the next slide, we were able to, as a city, really, despite some of those budget challenges and our ability and needs to focus on the community, incorporate the important work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you've probably heard the announcement, but I'm excited to announce it again every time I have the chance, that our new diversity, equity, and inclusion director, who is a key member of our leadership team, is starting on February 25th. Chow Matella, and she is just such a joy. She is going to be working very closely with our team and helping us continue to interweave and advance our work on the intercultural work, the work that we're doing, and starting with the National League of Cities on race, equity, and leadership, and then understanding what we have found with the impacts through our survey work with the Diversity Council, so that we can incorporate those into future goals. Both with the work of our collaborative partners and the things that we're doing with the Mike Knight Foundation and the Mayor's Institute on Job Creation and Economic Opportunity. So despite all those challenges, we really have been able to prioritize our foundational principles, been able to come together I think that it's wonderful to see as we continue through this and start to see the light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccination and the work of the county and our partners, that we're going to be stronger through this, that we've learned that together we can move forward. And so that forward together is going to be a very important principle for the city of Rochester, our leadership throughout the organization, and our leaders, elected leadership of the city council and mayor. So with that, I will be open to any questions if we're able to pull up the poll.
Cool. So what we'll do now is we'll try to do polls on both the city and the county. I'm going to ask Patrick to do his presentation before we bring you guys back. But while this is still fresh, why don't we see, Cody, you want to give it a whirl? Let's try first the county and then the city and see if we can poll and what people want to hear more about.
Allison, if you can hear me, can you hear you a little below the poll? We've been trying to work this behind the scenes here.
Okay.
Allison with 2 L's, not the 1 L.
Yes, sorry. I am here. And which one would you like me to do, the city or the county?
How about just starting with the county and then go to the city?
Okay, I'm gonna launch the poll for the county right now.
And I'll note for everyone who's listening that we'd like just the members of the boards and city council to be the ones to respond, so we can get the cleanest view of how we'd like to prioritize this discussion. So no members of the public should be responding to the poll.
How we doing, folks? Can you guys tell how many responded?
Yep, we're about almost 30%.
Okay.
It's probably reading, yeah, it's probably reading percentage of the entire audience.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right, let's give it one more minute. Okay.
So I'm gonna end.
We can see the, if you can.
Go to the city. Right, as you're completing that, when we're give it another minute, we'll ask Patrick to do his, and then we'll take that poll, and then we'll get the results and ask all three of you to come back and address the questions we have. Okay, Patrick, you ready?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. What I plan to do is use really the outline of the presentation I did at the Mayor's State of the City, which really tried to look at how we, sorry, I'm just trying to control my screen here as well. How we are approaching recovering from COVID and really leveraging the history of the work that we have been doing. And so talking about private investment, looking back, we are proud of the fact that there's been more than or nearly $1 billion worth of private investment in the first phase. As we look forward, we're looking toward ensuring that local businesses have opportunities to participate in Rochester's growth. So that's the pivot we see around private investment. Around equitable economic development, we had ambitious goals around targeted businesses and workforce participation. Now, as we look forward, we're looking toward a more just and equitable approach in all economic development decisions, and you heard some conversation about that this morning. Around energy and sustainability, we launched initiatives to reduce our carbon footprint, and now we look toward a more 21st century approach to sustainability and community resilience. And with respect to our goal of attracting life science and technology companies from around the world, and we've seen that happening, now we're doubling down on supporting local entrepreneurs and startups. With respect to public infrastructure, more than almost $70 million in generational public infrastructure during our first phase. Now we look toward future-proofing our city with universal design and assistive technology that allows every resident of every age and ability to fully realize their potential and participate in our community. So as we are doing infrastructure investment, we are looking at strategies to enable people to have full participation. And then we heard a little bit of conversation at the board meeting about this notion that we've told our story, the Rochester story, to businesses and investors and developers from around the region, around the country. Now we will make the same case to individuals and families, people who can choose anywhere to work, and we would ask, why not Rochester? And some of our conversation at this session today is really around this question of why not Rochester, and why would we not position Rochester as the location for people who can live anywhere, would choose as their place for them as individuals and their families. So that's my abbreviated presentation.
Okay, so why don't we now poll on that and then ask all three of you to come back. So can we do a poll on the city? All right.
So this is the poll on my presentation.
Yes. I'm sorry, I meant to say DMC. Sorry.
Yep. I think we're probably good with response.
Okay, so our three presenters, we're going to ask you to dig down and coding you the results here. Here we go. So why don't we start, Patrick, and then we'll work backwards as long as we have yours up here. So looking at these results, equitable economic development is the area we most like on the class. Why don't you give us a minute or two on that?
Yeah, just simply really to say that all of us, I think, have been looking at the prosperity growth of Rochester and really trying to understand how do we ensure that all boats rise in a rising tide. How do we make sure that we are intentional about our decisions that ensure people who have otherwise been left behind or more marginalized can fully participate. And we know that our strategies around workforce development, rather around women and minority-owned businesses being able to participate as contractors or service providers has really been a step in the right direction, but it's not the entire work that we should be doing. How do we ensure that people have opportunity for home ownership? How do we ensure that people can participate in the community decision-making? Research tells us that when people feel ownership of the community by virtue of participating in decision-making, they are much more likely to be lifelong residents and committed to the city. And our co-design methodology is one example of giving opportunities for people who don't normally participate in community decisions to actually sit at the design table just as lay people, but with lived experience, to actually shed light on and influence decisions that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. So we really are building out this strategy. We are putting in a request to the McKnight Foundation through their Vibrant and Equitable Communities program to help support us. We will tie directly to the work that Cha will be doing in her new role at the city. So those are some examples around our commitment and interest around equitable development.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's go to the poll on the city, if we could. Okay, so we want to know more about city council priorities. We do have the council president with us too. I wonder if that might be a good spot to ask our new council president to comment on that.
I think that would be great.
Sorry to put you on the spot there, but you comfortable with that?
Yes, well, we, as Allison said, we're actually really just in the moment of exploring what our overall priorities are. So we had a great initial discussion, and in the next 2 months, I think we'll be going through some strategic planning to make sure we are in agreement as a council about how we best support our community right now and make decisions, knowing that the years ahead might be difficult as well, that the impacts of COVID go well beyond where we are at right now in this moment. So I know we've talked a lot about affordable housing and sort of pieces around making sure people can live and work here in this community. But other than that, I think we have really important discussions ahead that intersect with DMC and otherwise touch the broader community. So I don't know if Mayor Norton or my council colleagues want to, or Allison want to weigh in. I think
It's an open invitation.
If I may just share as the newest, I think. One observation that I would have is that one thing I found very inspiring is that there definitely is a strong desire for the city council and mayor to work together closely, to always be looking at that forward together, to understand where the partnerships are, where the city council influences, where the city council and mayor lead, where the city council and mayor maybe are supportive of something else, and to optimize and really look at it in a broader viewpoint than just, the city council, the city of Rochester, but to be looking at that from a collaborative approach, understanding the space that they work in and understanding how that could be elevated by others. So that was something that I took away from the initial conversation that I think is very promising.
Good. Mayor, any thoughts? Council members? Going once? Okay, good. Going twice, cool. Okay, could you please put up the county one? Okay. Heidi, do you want to take us through release
Sure.
Any commissioners who want to add on, please do.
Yes, I'll start, and then several of our commissioners may have more to say, and I'm not sure, but we may have our CFO, Wilfredo Roman Cantala, who was going to join us and may have more to say too. So we, as you know, we received $19.1 million in CARES Fund in the county. We also encouraged all the townships to apply, even though knowing that many of them probably wouldn't have a lot to spend their money on, but that we would be able to use that. And so we received an additional about $300,000 from the townships when they were not able to spend it. It flowed back to the county. A lot of that was, of course, spent on personnel time and things like making sure that the courts have the facility they need for the pandemic and so forth. But as I noted in my slides, it'll be, including that money and now the state's fund, it'll be $7 million that we've distributed to small businesses. We used Ready as the administrator for that. We worked pretty hard on a series of what are the criteria for that, and we focused very much on small businesses. They changed a little bit over time, but in terms of getting a little bit looser over time with our second and third round. But we were looking at their revenue, the change in their revenue and the change in their profit. And then we have also sent another stream of funding to the nonprofits. As you all know, that community is really important here as well. And so it'll be about 1.7 million that will have been distributed to the nonprofits, again, based on what has a change in their revenue or profits been because of, that's really due to the pandemic. So, and I guess I could just add our latest round here, the latest data I have is that we had 364 small businesses apply. I don't think we'll be able to fund all of that in this third round. We were able to fund just about everybody that applied in the first two rounds. This third round we won't be able to get to everybody because there's still a demand out there. So with that, I think I would turn over. The commissioners worked very hard as a group on this project, and I think I'd turn it over to our chair, Commissioner Podolsky, to see if she has additional comments.
Yeah, hi. We did work as a group to set the priorities for what the think the first time we worked on profits, and the second round we set the priorities with revenue. And we tried to be as inclusive as we could and make the application simple for people. And I think Ready did a fine job with setting up that application. I didn't hear any complaints from businesses. I don't know if any other commissioners did. That the application process was clear, the requirements were clear, and I hope we were able to save a lot of our niche businesses here, because that's what makes our city so charming. I'm sorry about the phone. That's what makes our city charming, our smaller businesses. So that's what I have to offer.
That's great. Any commissioners with a quick comment? Terrific. Okay, so what we want to do now is, thanks all of you, really helpful to get all this on board. Now I want to put this in the context of work we're doing together. We're going to bring in Aaron Longoff from HRNA, which did COVID-related work with the Destination Medical Center. Patrick, I wonder if you could set this up just so we give people a sense of what the overall part of this work was.
Thank you. So we're going to turn to Aaron Longoff with HRNA, economic development and analysis firm that we've retained here. It's been they've been used in southeastern Minnesota, in the Twin Cities, and around the country, and including work most recently with our 5-year update. Many of you have seen the webinar that we hosted, where they provided a detailed report of their work. I've asked Aaron today to really spend time with us on the 5, now 6 recommendations that they are proposing and that they're suggesting that we consider here in this region. And Aaron, I'm just going to send you a cue here. I think it's really important that we get to the recommendations quickly, and that we give the floor as much as possible to our board members and commissioners, so that they can react to and comment on those recommendations. So with that, Aaron, I'll give the floor back to you. Give the floor to you.
Go to the next slide. Thanks for the intro. Hi, everyone. I'm Aaron Longoff, as Patrick said, and as Patrick's also mentioned, I've done work throughout the southeastern region of Minnesota. HRNA is a real estate and economic development consulting firm. We have offices across the country. I'm based in Minneapolis and grew up in the state, and I'm very passionate about Rochester and southern Minnesota. So if you go to the next slide, it doesn't need really reiterating. We all know this, but COVID has been a dual public health and economic crisis. And as we've already been talking about today, given that Rochester is the 3rd largest city in Minnesota, Rochester's recovery is critical for the state of Minnesota. And right to Sheila Cascaden's point this afternoon, Rochester is a key economic hub for Southeast Minnesota. Nearly half of the jobs in Southeast Minnesota are located in Rochester, and 30% of downtown workers come from outside Olmsted County. So it's really important that we think about the sort of broad implications of COVID recovery for southern Minnesota. As we look at the sort of economic recovery from COVID, our thoughts and our perspective is that careful planning and thoughtful interventions can help to bend the curve. And let me talk about sort of the stages of this recovery first before we get into the recommendations. So the first of this recovery is looking at the economic shock due to COVID. How deep is this initial impact of business shutdowns? How many jobs are going to be lost? What's the depth of this initial shock? Second is what is the rate of the recovery, and what are the key milestones for recovery to occur? When will businesses be able to reopen again? And then as we look out into the future, what's the new normal as we look at recovery? What percentage of jobs will be physically located in downtown Rochester after stabilization? This is particularly relevant as increasing increasing numbers of companies are announcing permanent work from home or work from anywhere policies. What does that look like for the landscape of Rochester and Southeast Minnesota? So our model included 3 scenarios: an optimistic, moderate, and conservative, that ultimately estimated the impact to development in Rochester. As measured through jobs and economic output, we then translated that into space needs in the long term, in the near term. There's a lot of uncertainty around the full impact of COVID-19. Before COVID-19, Rochester had a growing economy and development was very, very strong in downtown, and it was aligned with demand. Rochester is going to have an excess capacity at downtown office space due to job loss and the growth of permanent remote work. Downtown retail and restaurants that were dependent on employees and visitors are being disproportionately affected when it comes to counterparts with broader customer bases. Hotels have experienced a precipitous drop in occupancy rates. With Rochester's hotel pipeline, that the market is going to continue to see occupancy rates well below historical averages. And one sort of bright side of this is that housing demand appears to be relatively strong and stable in Rochester, and particularly in downtown Rochester. So growth in downtown residential could help to support the retail businesses in downtown Rochester. So what's the path forward? And this is where we want to spend the most time today. The DMC and downtown development are going to need to remain nimble as the economic recovery from COVID becomes clearer.
Oh, I want to interrupt for 1 second here. And sometimes we are using the term DMC and downtown development. Just remember, this work was commissioned as it related to our 5-year update. And I think we should read this more broadly than that. So just for the sake of this conversation, understand that this was a more narrow definition, but I think intentionally we should understand these as potential strategies that go far beyond that more narrow geography.
Yep, that makes sense. Thanks, Patrick. So unlike natural disasters, this pandemic hit every city in the country. But what's fantastic for you all is that you all are trying to get ahead of this. Not all cities are actually developing recovery strategies right now. And certainly not from a regional perspective like you all right now on this meeting. Despite significant losses, Rochester has fared better than other cities, as the county was already talking about in the city. You all are coming from a place of strength in this pandemic and prior to the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, you had a robust and growing economy. You have a very strong healthcare industry and the Mayo Clinic providing stability during weak economies, during recessions. And the city has tools along with the DMC to support growth and recovery. So let's jump into some of the recommendations. So Patrick had mentioned we have 5, we now have 6, and we're going to go through each of these in a little bit more detail and discuss these. Patrick, I might, if you don't mind, run through these quickly so we can sort of go through each, and then we can come back and spend time discussing each one individually.
Okay.
So the first, if you go to the next slide, is about supporting development proactively.
So actually, Aaron, I actually would prefer you just run through them very briefly, and then we're going to pause on each to let board members participate.
Great.
Yeah, so I'm sorry.
Right. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll run through these very briefly, and we'll pause them on each.
Can I also say, as we're doing this, that we're going to be looking at the chat. So 2 things, we're going to use the chat to figure out who's going to speak. But we also can, if you simply want to make a comment and have that read, you can use the chat as we're talking through this. And please do that, because even if we don't get a chance to read out all of them in this meeting, it'll be a way for us to give your opinion. So now we'll stop interrupting you and go forward, but I just wanted people to take advantage of that.
Perfect. So strategy number 1, support development proactively. As an economic development consultant that works across the country, these are the issues that we are working with cities with and have been doing this for years. What it means to support development proactively can mean a whole host of things. I've listed out a number of these, but through zoning and land use policies, expedited entitlements and approvals that help the development community move from sort of that idea pre-development phase into groundbreaking. Financial incentives like TIF or tax abatements that are aligned with public sector missions that support vertical development. Land banking, there are a whole host of ways that public sector entities across the country support private sector investment. So if we go to the next slide. The next is prioritizing public infrastructure. What we've seen, if we look in history, one of the ways that cities have recovered from disasters and economic disasters is through prioritizing public infrastructure investment. It helps to make cities more livable and attractive. What I mean by infrastructure could include public realms, streetscape improvements, transit and mobility investments, broadband investments, and that's particularly, the last point is particularly important for that sort of regional perspective, particularly as you get into the more rural communities in southern Minnesota. Diversify the economy. So how do you think about the ways that you can leverage the strengths that Rochester brings and the key industries here to create spin-off jobs and attract spin-off companies that want to co-locate in Rochester? There are likely huge and significant opportunities related to biotech, life sciences that could and want to be in Rochester. And there may be other assets that you all can leverage to diversify the economy, such as your airport. Not all regions have airports for cities of this size, and that may be an asset that you can leverage for other industries. Support local businesses, and there's already been quite a bit of talk about this today. The focus recently has been around short-term funding tools to help businesses survive the day-to-day in this crisis. As you all look to long-term solutions, there may be other things that you can be doing to support your local businesses. We've been seeing restaurants that are located on wide sidewalks, adjacent to parking lots or public spaces. They've adapted to outdoor eating in this pandemic, but they've been constrained because of the winter months in many locations. Longer term strategies may consider diversifying the customer base to grow demand. So if you don't have as many office employees in downtown Rochester, for example, could you be leaning into the market demand for more housing and specifically then tapping into that growth in residents to support retail businesses? Other strategies could include business support services like technical assistance for tech adoption, marketing, grants for facade or capital improvements. And then are there also other ways to grow the retail cluster in downtown to make it a vibrant destination that people want to go when it's safe to shop again in person? Reuse excess real estate capacity creatively. We saw this during the last recession, and I'm assuming we're going to be seeing this more and more as recovery continues over the next few months and years. So after the Great Recession, for example, we saw in some urban cores like Center City, Philadelphia, or downtown LA, where office vacancy rates were high, rents were low, but there was demand for multifamily housing. We saw some Class B and C office properties get converted into residential. We've been seeing recently urban hotels have become temporary offices, schools, emergency housing and homeless shelters. We've been seeing the need for some property owners to think creatively about their ground floor vacancies. This may need to include reconsidering tenanting approaches by lowering rents or being creative about how these spaces are used. Maybe these ground floor spaces are being used for art installations, medical offices, community centers, or product showrooms. And then there may be other sorts of obsolete real estate products that could become prime redevelopment sites in the long run. And then finally, the attract work from home or work from anywhere talent. This is an addition. This is, I think, a growing, there's growing interest in this idea that as more companies announce their workers are being fully remote and can work from anywhere, as Patrick said, why not Rochester? Why not Southeast Minnesota? And cities should strive to attract those who can have that flexibility. And what those people are going to be looking for is a high quality of life. So affordable and accessible housing. They're going to need broadband for their remote job. They are going to be looking for amenities of city living that they probably are leaving. They want access to open space. They're going to want a unique and distinct city brand. Why they want something interesting that they're going to. They'll likely need airport access. And I think this is one of the great ways that you all can be really proactive in economic recovery. And I'll just end with one anecdote. I am one of those relocators. I was out in New York City with my job for the last 6 years. But during COVID, our 2-bedroom Brooklyn apartment with our baby was too small. So we moved back to Minnesota, and we're really, really happy with this relocation. My husband and I have the great fortune of having jobs that are work from anywhere. So why not other folks like my husband and I?
Great. Well, thank you so much. Let's use this as a pivot for discussion. I'm going to read 2 comments from the chat section and make one myself and then open it up. So Nick Campion, Councilmember Campion, says, I'm concerned that diversity sends the wrong message. We should be looking to land and expand additional companies in additional companies in markets where we have a strong leadership, like biotech, medical, and medtech, also as part of a regional and statewide strategy. Greg Wright adds, are we looking at all zoning that also includes affordable housing, such as adding apartments within an existing house for an elderly relative, allowing alternate housing styles such as tiny houses, zoning